Today's episode of Filmmaker U is brought to you by our sponsors OWC. Go to owcdigital.com for all your filmmaking and computer needs. And it's also brought to you by our other sponsors, AJA. Make sure to check out aja.com so that you can see how they can help you in your post-production needs. Hi, I'm Gordon Burkell from Filmmaker U. At Filmmaker U, we create courses for film professionals to deepen and diversify your existing skill set. You can learn more at filmmakeru.com, or of course follow us on Twitter at filmmaker_U. Every week, we interview a film professional to discuss their work, and this week I'm joined by sound designer Nathan Ruyle, whose work includes Long Night, The Voyeurs, and Profile, just to name a few. Thanks for joining us today, Nathan.
Hey, thanks for having me.
I guess my first question for you is, how do you get on the same page with the director when you first sort of start a project or starting to get involved with a project?
You know, it varies a lot from project to project. And I think my number one philosophy is, every project has its own kind of sound and sound design and approach to the sound that's unique. And, of course, we often talk about genre, or we talk about thinking about films in a certain category. But, what I love is really trying to find what is the unique way that sound works in a specific film? And oftentimes it's kind of pushing against or finding a different path to a certain way that the sound might function in, say, a horror movie or a drama or a thriller, certainly drawing on the kind of expectations, but sometimes subverting them, or sometimes just finding a different way to craft the sound to get to that result, but it creates a different kind of feeling or texture or quality or experience ultimately of the sound. So that's always number one. But also, I have so much respect for filmmakers, and I consider myself a filmmaker as well. I have so much respect for what it takes to direct a film or produce a film, and so I also, I really try to kind of certainly listen and try to understand intellectually where a director or a writer or producer, where they're coming from in terms of what they're trying to create, but also really thinking about the kind of feeling and the experience, and trying to kind of find an empathic approach also, right? Because a lot of these things with movies, it's as much about how something feels and the experience of how it feels as it is the kind of idea, right? Because you could have, there's so many movies that I've been even read a script, or I've been told like, this is the idea of what it is. And then when I actually watch it or see it, there's something that's much different than what the kind of idea on the page was. And so, oftentimes it's about keying into what the director is trying to do, and also giving them the space to be able to even figure that out. Because a lot of times it's through our conversations at the beginning, through, through the spotting of the movie, through just that experience of getting started, they're even kind of discovering what they think the sound is going to be. And, of course, I'm using my experience having done, hundreds of projects now. I'm also able to sometimes pull, sometimes it's about techniques and saying like, oh, we worked with the voice and manipulated the voice in this way. Here's the way we can use this technology to maybe try to accomplish something. Or sometimes it's just about thinking about maybe a scene. It's not even something I've done, but it's a movie that I love, or that I can kind of see like, this could be a roadmap for what we're trying to create. We work a lot with AFI. We have an internship program here at This Is Sound Design, and we work a lot with AFI on their thesis films, which is always great to sit with young filmmakers. And because, not only they're very receptive, but also oftentimes they have really interesting thoughts and ideas as the sort of next generation. But I was just working on or I was just sitting with a director last week, and I said, have you seen the film THX 1138, which is, this very specific genre movie, essentially, that George Lucas made. And, and then she had seen it. And so we were able to kind of use that as a way to kind of like think about certain aspects of the film. So all those pieces come into play when we're trying to kind of get started and, ultimately figure out what the kind of arc of the sound is in the film.
Now, was it THX 1138 the short or the feature film that you made?
The feature is what we were talking about. The short's great too, though. I love
Yeah,
it.
yeah. I'm going to interrupt this interview for 1 second. We want to thank PixelView, one of our sponsors. They're a streaming solution for filmmakers. PixelView lets you stream your work to remote clients for easy collaboration, and it works with both on-set teams and post-production teams. With built-in video chat, you can discuss and make changes in real time and stream directly from your editing software. Or you can use the hardware encoder to stream from DaVinci Resolve or the camera on set. See the promo code and the link in the video description below. Now back to the show. You mentioned getting people to feel like how it's a sort of sensory thing when we go to see the film. So how do you like to do that as a sound designer? Like, what are some of your ideas or tricks or techniques to do that?
Well, I mean, I think for me, it comes down to, I mean, it's on some level very fundamental the way I think about this work. And, my company is called This Is Sound Design. And that, that really embodies an idea about using sound in films and using sound in media that is at its heart experiential. And certainly there's sort of two almost polar ends of the spectrum in terms of how we approach that. One is, sound is so incredibly technical and it's so cool in that way. I mean, the sort of physical hardware you can see behind me, the Avid S6 console, this modular console, just one of the most fantastic pieces of technology ever made, I think. And then also like all the software that we have, I mean, especially in the last decade or so, it's just incredible the way that we're able to take these tools and generate and manipulate and sort of realize things that were just seemed like impossible ideas when I started doing this 15 years ago. Now what I often say is that whenever I started out in this business and started out as a sound designer, I had a lot of ideas of what I wanted to try to do with sound, both in terms of, generating things and manipulating things, but also in terms of mixing and creating spatialization and all these kind of things that, the tools just weren't really there. So very often you would sort of aim at of realizing a certain idea, and you very rarely would really get there. And what I found is in the last 5 years or so, the tools are so good, we're starting to be able to pitch and starting with these seed ideas that are really, really out there, are cool, or almost seem like magic, and we can do it. We can accomplish it, which is a really exciting thing. And so that is a part of it. But and specifically when we're thinking about mixing now with Dolby Atmos, this is my A stage here at This Is Sound Design in Burbank, which is a true theatrical Dolby Atmos stage with 28 surround speakers, and we have an RMU renderer. So we're able to do really insanely immersive stuff in here. And that's very experiential and it really creates a kind of feeling and experience of a movie. But then I think, the other polar end of sound design for me is thinking about how sound is this kind of incredible sense that we have. And unlike our vision, it's sort of wired into our brain and into our body, even bypassing the brain in some cases, in such a specific way. And so, it's often, I wrote an article last year called talking about sound as the invisible art. And it really is this kind of invisible experiential force that we can harness. And when you really understand the kind of neuroscience and you really understand the way our ears work in terms of our experience in the world and the way that it dictates emotion, it dictates our sense of safety, going really deep into sort of our mammal reptile brain and how these things are, developed over the kind of whole of evolution. You can also, it's like you take this technology piece, which is really, really magical in the ability to be able to kind of like take an idea and realize it in a real way in a film. But then when you understand the way the human mind works and how the audience sort of like functionally experiences something, those two things are incredibly powerful when you put them together. And so that's what I'm thinking about in everything I do. And sometimes it's very direct, like a horror movie and a jump scare. And, we understand, like, right, the ear is wired straight down the spine, bypasses the brain completely. That one's more straightforward. But I think some of the other more subtle things, just in how we shape an environment or an ambience, or, just even the real subtleties of how an object can sound in a film, they actually do have a really powerful mechanism for how the audience experiences a film. And so, so that's kind of what I'm always kind of balancing between the kind of like one part of my brain, which is the engineering side, and which is the side that people often think about when they think about sound, right? It's like we're these kind of wizard technicians who know how to harness all this software and hardware and make these kind of almost impossible seeming things. But also there's this other side of it, which is about a very empathic, experiential part of the brain, which is very much a different thing. It's that thing that we have when we listen to music, right? It kind of makes us feel in spite of our logical mind, for instance. And so being able to kind of work between those two parts of the human experience, I think, and those two kind of tools in a way in terms of filmmaking are really, when you find that sweet space between those two, that's when sound design is sound design, and it's incredibly powerful.
Now, you touched on one thing. So like you're in an Atmos theater at the moment, but one of the things that's, I mean, partially it's got to be frustrating, but like you'll do all this work and then all of a sudden someone's like, I'm going to watch it on my iPhone, like, so how do you make sure that even if they're watching on the iPhone or on a bad TV with bad sound, they're still getting some kind of experience or some kind of sensory emotion?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, this has been a long kind of trajectory of sound in movie making. And I think we're actually entering a phase in a technological space that this is gonna be less of a factor than it used to be. When I first started mixing movies now, which is about 15 years ago, I was at grad school at CalArts and got my hands on a console and a 5.1 mix stage for the first time. You think that it's like, oh, I'm going to move these sounds around and it's going to be, I'm going to be able to make everything so immersive. And what you ultimately realized is that, really it's a sound here, and then the front, right? And so even the 5.1 experience was still somewhat limited, and it was a lot more about the power of the speakers and the bass and all that made it really work. And, obviously sound enters the space. So there is an element of like, it does surround you, even if it's a mono speaker, it's still kind of, you're experiencing it in somewhat of an immersive way. But there was a middle period, especially as things started to move online and phones and computers started to become more prevalent, where, it was really tricky. And actually even the way that level worked in a computer versus in a phone was a big problem, like, or in a theater was a big problem. Like you couldn't even get the sound loud enough to be able to like hear the subtleties of a film. So we were in a tough spot there. But ultimately, I think we're actually entering kind of a phase, and there's various aspects of it. One is that just, psychoacoustic research is really making incredible progress. And I can, this is an area that I'm constantly exploring and thinking about. I recently got a Sonos soundbar at my house that's an Atmos soundbar, and it is 100% an Atmos experience. And it is able to, in a bar underneath your television, move sound around your head and really create an immersive experience by bouncing sound off the walls in your room. It's profound what they're able to do with this kind of engineering. And in fact, I don't know if you heard this, but just this week at the new Apple announcement for the new AirPod, one of the things they announced is something that's been coming for a really long time, which is the scientific term is head-related transfer response, which is it's the way that our specific ears function, and even the bones and the placement of our ears on our head, how we personally experience sound in our own way based on our hearing apparatus. And Apple actually integrated into new AirPods the scientific term is personal head-related transfer response, where, and I can't remember what they're calling it, but essentially you literally take a photograph of your head and your ear, and then it adjusts the binaural sound for your specific physical hearing design so that you can have completely immersive sound when you're listening to something, even through a pair of earbuds.
Wow.
And so ultimately, it could very well be the case here in a few years that we're mixing a theatrical film in this Atmos stage, with all these speakers, and, you're going to get a profound experience if you go to the Dolby Theater here in Burbank at the AMC. It's incredible. When I saw the new Blade Runner film from a few years ago there, it was just one of the most perfect sounding movies in that theater. It was unbelievable. I was like, how could it ever get better than this? But I think what's interesting is, as this kind of research is happening with personal devices, it's possible that we could have the next best version of the movie beyond the Atmos stage could be listening in the earbuds. And I think that's, I think we're headed in that direction. And I think it's only going to get better as, you take the technology of, say, the sound bar and put that into the bezel of a phone or into an iPad. There's a lot of this happening. And so I think we've probably already hit the low point for this issue of where the quality translation is a problem. And we're probably moving back in a direction that I think where, more and more, the work that we're doing on the theatrical version of the movie is going to really beautifully translate. And a lot of that has to do even with how Dolby, one of the cool things about theatrical Atmos is that it does, we use this render machine. It's a separate renderer where we feed the mix into it. And then from that render, we can actually generate a 5.1, a 7.1, a stereo, and it retains a lot of the immersive quality of the original mix. I just did a big theatrical Atmos mix. We actually just did our first big budget movie called Cabrini that'll be coming out probably at the beginning of next year, where we did a proper big budget mix where we pre-dubbed for many weeks and then did a final mix for 3 weeks in one of the big Atmos stages here in Hollywood. And one of the things that it was really interesting is, having designed the entire movie in Atmos and incredibly immersive, and scenes where the camera's moving and you're hearing sounds pass through, and it's all just really kind of a beautiful example of what's possible with an Atmos mix, and not just with spaceships and everything, but with something that's subtle, but really putting the audience in the world. And we were so amazed that when we hit the button to listen to the 5.1 mix in the stage, it almost all of what we had made still translated to the 5.1. Because what it's doing is it's rendering down a lot of the psychoacoustic information. So it's using the math of how the sounds are moving. So even when you're getting what's ultimately ending up in these surround speakers, it's doing more than just placing the sound here or there. It's actually rendering some of the psychoacoustic experience into the material. Interesting.
Now, to jump topics, is there a particular genre that you like to work in?
Honestly, I like doing every genre, and I like not staying in one genre all the time, which is a little bit unusual, but I think it's becoming more of the trend. It's because also, even if you look at some of the directors we're working with, they're jumping from genre to genre. One of my dreams in building my own facility, is that I really wanted to make this about collaboration and about my relationships with directors and producers, and, really building what I hope are lifelong collaborations. So, within that, what's really fun is for us and my team here is that we love working on, a variety of different things, not only because it just creates a lot of, it makes things more interesting, but also because they even speak to each other and how we might work on. We just did a movie that won Uncertain Regard at Cannes and just had a really exciting premiere at Toronto, the movie called Joyland, which is getting a little bit of Oscar buzz and IndieWire this last week for best foreign language feature. It's this very kind of verite, very kind of like first person kind of handheld camera kind of drama shot in Pakistan, and it's so textured and so beautiful and so sort of real feeling. And then, we're also then immediately we went into this period drama that's like a big movie with hundreds of extras, and it's all about building out these like incredibly elaborate set piece moments and scenes where you have Foley for 100 people walking in a crowd. And so it's like those are very different things. But if I'm mixing a movie like Joyland, there's certain kind of feeling in how you as a mixer and as a sound designer are communicating with that material, which in many ways is we're limited, is we don't have the budget and the time to generate tons of Foley. And so you're working with the material you have and you're shaping it and you're finding the kind of musicality of the verite nature of the film. But then when I move back to mixing on the bigger movie, a lot of that kind of energy comes in, and it makes me think about, okay, now I'm looking at 1,000 tracks of material and 8 weeks of Foley recording, but I'm also thinking about, bringing in some of that verite feeling that I'm working with on the other movie, And so, and even sometimes if we're working on a documentary or we just did an animated project, all of those things are sort of like, you're in a way, you're like, kind of you're forced to communicate and to work with the material you have, but also it bleeds over from project to project. And so I think it's all a part of our growth. And for both me and my whole team, we're constantly growing because we're never really doing the same thing twice. Or if we are, in between those projects, we've had, 20 other things that are very, very different. And ultimately, by the time I come back to I did a horror movie last year, we're getting ready to start another one. All those experiences I had in between on very different types of movies are going to inform this next version of the horror movie. So I also evolve creatively. The other thing I'll say quickly is, having now worked on some movies with the directors 2 and 3 times, there's also an interesting way that we develop a language for how we work with sound in one film that then we evolve, and sometimes the genre is different, but we're able to bring that kind of language through. I have a editor, Brian Schofield, who I've worked with on, like, I think maybe getting close to 10 projects now, from tiny indie films that went to South by Southwest to now we just did 2 big budget movies, one an action movie, one this historical epic. But we're having an ongoing conversation about the way that we think about the work, and even some of the techniques we're doing. In this case, where we've been developing this technique where we use this synthesizer that kind of generates winds and whooshy, airy movements, and we've been using this in films that are very different types of films. But it's like something, as he is an editor, when he's cutting, he's thinking about that thing that we've been developing within the sound that is a little, it's not genre specific, it's something that we can utilize in different genres. And so that's also a factor that's coming into play even within an ongoing collaboration.
Now, I like to ask this of sound designers or Foley artists: what is the weirdest sound you had to create?
Let me think. The funny thing is I don't do a lot of Foley anymore. And early in my career, I did everything, and it was just me for a while. First few features I did, and then I had one editor I worked with. I would defer to my Foley artist on that because I'm a little bit so far away from it. But I know that our our Foley artist has, oftentimes he has to do things that involve sex scenes, which is like often kind of awkward. And so that's kind of funny. I'm trying to think if there's anything that would be especially interesting. I mean, what I can say is that it's not really what you ask, but we did have a great Foley experience in this last movie, Cabrini, because it was this historical film. One of the things that is always tricky with historical is you have to find all these objects. And we actually reached out through the editor to a production designer that he is close with, and she suggested this company here in LA that does historical props, and it turned out that they had actually provided all the historical props for the film. So we actually got all the actual props from the film, which is the first time that had happened for Foley, which was actually, it's one of those moments where like, I wonder why we haven't thought of doing this before. So I think one of our new things is on our bigger budget projects, we're actually just going to reach out to the production designer and find out where they were pulling rental from, because it makes it very easy, because in this movie, there's very specific elements that are, very specific objects that when we had the real object, like, oh, wow, that is exactly that object. I could say I did a movie called, It Came From Below, and it was it's a genre movie where essentially it's like an alien fish creature, has Mina Savari in it, and there's a sequence where Mina Savari gives birth to an alien fish creature. There was some interesting Foley that had to be done to make that happen, because it's like you're dealing with weird textures, and so that's the kind of example of the things that come up. But yeah, I wish I had a better answer for you. I should have if I thought about it long enough, I'm sure I could come up with something more interesting. But yeah.
Now I have one last question for you. What would you say is your favorite guilty pleasure show or movie to watch?
Well, so I mean, I think one of the things that my wife and I have started doing is that we've started doing a yearly viewing of Game of Thrones.
Oh yeah.
And so and then this last year, we finished watching it maybe 4 or 5 months ago, and my wife's like, well, maybe we should just watch it again. House of the Dragon's on. And so that one is a little bit just like, we probably a little obsessive over that. But I have a few movies that I go back to over and over. One movie is Moneyball that I just love so much, and I've just watched it so many times. And it's like, it's like a joke between my wife and I that like we'll be sitting there trying to come up with something to watch on a Friday night, and eventually it's like, well, is it going to be Wolf of Wall Street or Moneyball? The two movies we watched like 100 times. But actually, the one that's been the newer one is Tenet, and I actually got very deep into Tenet during the pandemic, and but the trick with Tenet is watching it at home is because and this is talked about, that the dialogue is a little hard to hear. I have an EQ setting in my TV. It's just for Tenet that I turn on, and it's sort of the EQ that I would do if I were just trying to make a little dialogue clarity in a mix. Yeah. And so I turn that on, and then I can hear all of it. So it's great. But I got very deep into that, and very deep into the Reddit threads about the ideas, and so I find that one. So it's a little bit.
Well, thank you so much for letting me interview you this week.
Yeah, right on.
And that's it for this week. Make sure to check us out at filmmakeru.com, or of course follow us on Twitter at filmmaker_u. I'm Gordon Burkell. Thanks for watching. Today's episode of Filmmaker U is brought to you by our sponsors OWC. Go to owcdigital.com for all your filmmaking and computer needs. And it's also brought to you by our other sponsors, AJA. Make sure to check out aja.com so that you can see how they can help you in your post-production needs.